What's up, guys? So this is a tutorial that I was originally asked to do, I think like a year or two ago, but I just wasn't able to figure out how to do it, and I just didn't have as much free time to figure it out, and that is GPU pass-through into a virtual machine on GNU Linux. So this is something that's really cool to do, and I guess gives you some bragging rights because, like I said, it's kind of difficult to get everything set up. But it's also a really important piece of technology for people that have been, I guess you could say, red-pilled by GNU Linux, but still, for whatever reason, need to run applications that only work in Windows or macOS. So essentially, what this is going to let you do is it's going to let you pass through one or more of your physical graphics cards into that Windows VM, and as a result, you can get very close to native performance with the card in the VM. So very great solution for things like playing Windows-only games without having to go and get a second hard drive or create a separate partition and then install Windows to that and then dual boot or boot into it anytime you want to play a game. You can basically just start up a Windows VM with that pass-through graphics card as if it was just some other application. Or same thing if you needed to use Adobe Premiere or anything else that only works on Windows or macOS. So let's go ahead and get started with this tutorial. One other thing that I will mention is that this process is going to require rebooting your computer a couple of times. So you may want to bring this video up on your phone or maybe on another PC to follow along. And I'll try to edit the video so that you guys can actually read the important configurations on a smaller screen like a phone. So anyway, first thing we want to do is enable Iomu in your BIOS. So let's go ahead and actually reboot. Okay, so then you want to enter into your BIOS with either F2 or delete. You can see on my screen the options. It should tell you the same thing on yours. Okay, and then the settings that we're going to look for, they can go under a few different names. So obviously this is going to vary from BIOS to BIOS, but you're looking for something called either like Intel, I think it's called VT or maybe VD, or if you have an AMD chip, it's going to be called AMD VI, I believe. Now, on my particular BIOS, the what is this? The Asus ROG Zenith 2 Extreme. It is, I think it's just called Iomu. So this is another thing it could be called. Yeah. So this setting, or whether it's the VT, VD, whatever, you want to make sure that that is enabled. Okay. So you see, I already have it enabled in my system. So we'll just go ahead and reboot. Next, we need to enable Iomu in Grub. If you were using some other kind of boot manager, then you're going to have to just look up how to do this yourself. But I think for most of us on GNU Linux, we're going to be using Grub. So go ahead and open up etc default grub. And on this line here, the grub command line Linux default, you want to add either Intel underscore Iomu on equals on if you're using obviously an Intel CPU. It's going to be AMD if you're using an AMD CPU. And then you also need to pass these device IDs. So let me show you how to get those real quick. So if you run lspci nn, then this is going to give you the device IDs of everything that's connected to your system. So you want to look for like NVIDIA if you have an NVIDIA card, like here's the one for my 970. Now, as you can see, I've got a whole bunch of different things listed here. Oh, I actually just by chance was able to find the one for the 1080 Ti that I'm already passing through. But if you've got a whole bunch of devices like me, you can just pipe this into grep NVIDIA. And then that way it's going to just narrow down the options. And then same thing if you have an AMD card. So right here inside of the square brackets after the model of your graphics card, that is the device ID. So you're going to want to just write this down in a text editor or whatever, because we're going to have to pass it over to Grub. So this is the one for the video card, and you also have an audio interface on your graphics card as well, and you're going to want to pass through that one as well. So this is for video, and then this one here is for the audio of my 1080 Ti. And so you can see here, what I've got in Grub is VFIO PCI.IDs. And then we're providing the first one of the video card, comma, and then the sound card as well. Or at least the sound interface of the graphics card. Oh, and one other thing that I'll say about this Grub configuration, chances are, especially if you're using a distro that pretty much just installs Linux for you, you're going to have an option inside of this Grub command line Linux default that says quiet. And what that does is it prevents all of those messages of devices being initialized. It prevents that from popping up when you start up your system, like you saw when I was booting my system. You might want to disable that. And the reason why is these changes we're going to make to the system, if you end up doing something wrong, it could cause your system to not boot. And if you have that quiet option enabled, it makes it a whole lot more difficult to debug. Like, you're not going to get any error messages. Grub just isn't going to load Linux for you. So if you have quiet in here, you might want to disable it, but it's not necessary in order to get this GPU pass-through working. Okay, so once you've got those changes to Grub applied, go ahead and right quit or just save the Grub configuration, and then we need to rebuild Grub. So we'll do sudo grub mkconfig -o boot grub.cfg. And then go ahead and reboot your system again. Okay, so now we have to isolate the graphics card. And the reason for doing this is we want to prevent the Linux kernel from loading the drivers for that graphics card that would basically take over it. So in my case, it would have been the proprietary NVIDIA drivers. And because we're preventing these graphics cards drivers from loading, you need to have more than one GPU in your system so that your host still has one to use. So chances are most of you watching this guide probably have integrated graphics, like you have it built right into your CPU, so that's totally fine. That can count as a second GPU, but if you're using a Threadripper like me, it doesn't have integrated graphics, so you're going to need to have some second kind of graphics card installed. So basically the setup that I have right now is I've got the NVIDIA GTX 970 for my host, and then I've got the 1080 Ti configured to get passed through to guest. So now to isolate that graphics card, you're going to need the ID of it that we got from that lspci nn command. So same thing that's inside of these square brackets here, both for the graphics card and for the audio device. And again, make sure you're selecting the right one. You don't want to pass through the wrong card and have to go back and undo all this stuff. And then we're going to add those IDs of our pass-through card into our vfio.conf file. And it's totally fine if this file doesn't already exist. So I'll show you what the path is: etc modprobe.d and then vfio.conf. So if this file doesn't exist, just go ahead and use the same command anyway, or you can use nano instead, and it'll just create the file for you, because you'll see this is a pretty straightforward configuration. So what you're going to put is options, and then you're going to put vfio-pci. Then you can put IDs equals, and then you're going to put the graphics card, the ID of the GPU, and then the ID of the sound component. And then this line here, so this is actually one of the things that was holding me up for getting this working. So I think maybe it's just a thing for people that are using the proprietary NVIDIA drivers, because I think for whatever reason, those load very, very quickly in the boot process. So a lot of the time, even if you just have this set up here, NVIDIA is still going to load before VFIO. So if you put this configuration here, the soft-dep NVIDIA pre and then VFIO PCI, at least for me, that's what worked in order to finally get NVIDIA to stop taking over my graphics card whenever I reboot my system. So if you're finding issues, like if you, I'll show you in a minute how to check if this got applied successfully. But if you reboot without this option and you're not seeing that show up, try applying this to the configuration as well. So we'll right quit that. And now we have to rebuild our Init Ram Fs. So the command to do this is just going to be sudo mkinit cpio p linux. And you want to look through this to see if there's any errors. Things like warnings are fine. Well, depending on what it's talking about. If it's mentioning like VFIO in here, then the warning might be a problem. But if you see any errors in here, like if you make a spelling error in that vfio.conf, it's probably going to show up in here. So make sure that everything goes smoothly and that you get a successful image generation, and then reboot your system once more. Okay, so now, let me actually make this a little bit smaller. So after you've rebooted, you should be able to run the command lspcik, and we want to find our NVIDIA graphics card, or whichever graphics card you pass through. See, that's the 970. So you see the 970 I did not pass through, and so kernel driver in use is NVIDIA. And let's see, here it is. So the 1080 Ti, the kernel driver in use is VFIO PCI, and same thing for the sound card as well. So the NVIDIA driver is not touching this 1080 Ti at all. The host is not using it, so it's going to be available for the guest now. Okay, so now I'll show you guys how to get this graphics card passed through to a Windows VM. So I'm not going to walk you through the full process of creating a Windows VM because I just made that video like a week ago. But there are a few things that you're going to want to change from the defaults. Okay, so here's one. You want to make sure that the chipset that you're using is Q35, and you also want to make sure that the firmware is UEFI. By default, it's going to be using BIOS. And let's see, I think that's pretty much it as far as changing default config. So then you have to add the devices to the virtual machine. So you would just come down here to add hardware, and it's going to be PCI host device. And then this one, well, it gives you the names here, but let's say, like hypothetically, you've got two graphics cards, like you have two 1080 Ti's, and so you're just not sure which one is which. In here, see, I gotta scroll back to the top to show you guys the groups. So here is the grouping, like the IOMMU groups for your graphics card. So you can see this one is like 01000, 01001, and that matches these ones here. Okay, so that's how you can be sure that you're actually passing through the right ones. And you want to pass through both of them. So you can see that I've got the HDMI audio controller here, And then I've got the GeForce GTX 1080 Ti here. And of course, if you're passing this through to a Windows 10 virtual machine, you're also going to need those additional drivers to actually be able to get, well, you need it to get networking to work. Actually, I think I still have to install those in this. Let's see. Let's power on this VM and see if I have to do that. If I do, I'll just walk you guys through it. Full screen. Okay, yeah, it's like the resolution's all crazy, so I definitely haven't done that part yet, and I've got no internet. So let me show you guys what you got to do. You would have, when you were setting up your Windows VM, you would have, go away OneDrive, you would have had attached the second DVD drive. So that is what is here. And then we're going to run this Virt.io win guest tools. And agree, install. Accept the terms, next. So this is going to install all of this stuff for us. Install, and then, let's see, sure. So my network came up, finish, and let's see, I don't remember if it has to reboot or not. Let's see, let's change resolution. I forget what it's called under Windows. There we go. All right, so we'll do 1920 by 1080. Keep changes. And let's see, maybe I do have to reboot. Yeah, so let's do, actually, let me see if it even shows up in Device Manager. Maybe I have to install the drivers first. It's been a while since I've done anything in a Windows machine. Okay, it looks like... Okay, so it is detecting the 1080 Ti. All right, there we go. I think I still have to install drivers, though. You know, it's funny. People complain about Linux being too hard, but it's actually more difficult to install drivers on Windows than it is on Linux. So let's see. I've got a 10 series, 1080 Ti. All right, sure. We'll do game ready driver, download. And like I said, this should give you near native performance. There's some other things you can do that I'm not gonna cover in this video, like CPU pinning, where basically CPU pinning kind of works the same way as the GPU pass-through does, where instead of just blacklisting a card for the host and only allowing guests to have it, you're basically blacklisting some of the cores of your CPU. So that gives you closer to native CPU performance as well. So you're definitely going to want to do that if you're gaming or probably any other applications that you need to really pass through a strong graphics card, or you're probably going to want to do the CPU pinning as well. All right, we'll do graphics driver only, so we get a little less bloat. I'll just do Express, even though it's going to install some bloat. At least we got a little bit less bloat. All right, our installer is finished. And so now I should have the, oh, saw it right there. NVIDIA. God, I hate the Windows Start menu so much. It always wants to search for crap on the internet instead of just giving me the program I want. So there you go. You can see that we've got our 1080 Ti showing up here in the NVIDIA control panel within a Windows guest. And let me just do this real quick for any skeptics that think maybe there's some shenanigans going on. No, we are still here inside of Artix Linux. So there you go. That is basically just a really quick way to get a single GPU pass-through setup on your Linux machine, and also covering some things that I don't think a lot of other guides covered, because I had to dig through many guides to find the soft dep option to finally get NVIDIA to stop sniping my graphics card. So hopefully you found this video useful. Like and comment, tag the algorithm, and have a great rest of your day.